Pick that up, you thieving black trash. Or did you think that faded skin of yours grants you a free pass into a luxury lounge? Chloe Harrington screamed, her voice cutting through the heavy silence of the JFK private terminal like a serrated blade. With a vicious smirk, she raised her designer heel and slammed it directly onto a small, silver-framed photograph that had just fallen from Dr. Althea Vance's bag. The glass shattered. Underneath her expensive shoe was the only remaining picture of Althea's late mother. Chloe didn't stop there. She leaned in, her perfume cloying and suffocating. "Don't just stand there staring at me with those vacant eyes. Do you honestly think someone with your background could afford to breathe the same filtered air as me? Or were you just hoping to steal some gold fixtures on your way out?" She kicked the empty bag across the floor, sneering, "You're a complete embarrassment to this terminal. Get out of my sight before I have security drag you back to whatever street corner you crawled out of. People like you have a look, and it definitely isn't first class." Chloe was completely unaware that the soft-spoken woman she was humiliating did not clean the private jets outside. She owned them. In exactly 20 minutes, this billionaire heiress would learn that the very aircraft she rented for $45,000 belonged to the woman she just forced onto her knees. History is written by those who endure, but justice is executed by those who own the truth. Do not miss a single second of this incredible story. Comment your country and local time right now to join our global community, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss tomorrow's unforgettable lesson. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when the private terminal at JFK International Airport began to stir with its usual display of immense wealth. At 6:30 a.m., the exclusive lounge operated by Atlantic Aviation was a sanctuary of quiet luxury reserved strictly for individuals who measured their net worth in 9 figures. The air inside was heavy with the scent of expensive amber candles and fresh orchids flown in from Ecuador the night before. Soft leather chairs were spaced perfectly apart, providing absolute privacy for the elite travelers who passed through these walls. Standing near the floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the tarmac was Chloe Harrington. At 26 years old, Chloe was the sole heiress to the Harrington real estate empire, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that dominated the New York skyline. She was dressed in a vibrant crimson-red designer blazer and a matching silk dress that practically shouted her social status. Her blonde hair was styled into a flawless, rigid bob, and her ears caught the morning light with 5-carat diamond studs that cost more than an average American home. Chloe was traveling to Aspen, Colorado, for a high-profile charity gala where she expected to be the center of attention. She had chartered a private Gulfstream jet for the weekend, a routine transaction that cost her family's firm exactly $45,000. To Chloe, the world was a machine built solely for her convenience, and everyone else was merely grease for the wheels. In the far corner of the same lounge sat Dr. Althea Vance. Althea was an 52-year-old woman with a regal, composed demeanor and deep brown skin that carried the wisdom of decades of intense intellectual labor. She wore a simple charcoal gray cashmere sweater, comfortable denim jeans, and a pair of worn leather loafers. To the untrained eye, she looked entirely out of place in a terminal where people wore their bank statements on their wrists. Althea had her reading glasses balanced on the bridge of her nose, her attention completely absorbed by a thick stack of medical research documents concerning a new biotechnology patent. She had spent the last 30 years pioneering life-saving cellular therapies, earning herself a reputation as one of the most brilliant minds in modern medicine. But more than that, Althea was a woman who valued substance over superficial display. She sat quietly sipping a cup of black coffee, waiting for her scheduled departure. Chloe paced the lounge impatiently, her expensive heels clicking loudly against the polished marble floor. She was irritated because her favorite brand of sparkling water was out of stock, and she needed someone to blame. Her eyes swept across the room looking for a target, and they immediately locked onto Althea. Chloe's nose crinkled in immediate disgust as she took in Althea's casual attire and the plain canvas tote bag resting on the floor beside her chair. In Chloe's narrow mind, the luxury lounge had been breached by someone who clearly did not belong. She saw Althea's dark skin and simple clothing, and her mind instantly jumped to the ugliest, most arrogant conclusion possible. Chloe walked over to the lounge service desk where the assistant manager, a man named Robert Henderson, was standing. Robert was dressed in a sharp black suit, his hair slicked back, desperate to please the wealthy clientele. "Robert," Chloe said, her voice loud enough to carry across the quiet room. "Since when does Atlantic Aviation allow the cleaning staff to take their breaks in the VIP lounge? I pay thousands of dollars for exclusivity, not to share my space with people who look like they belong in a public bus depot." Robert went pale, recognizing the Harrington name immediately. He looked over at Althea, then back to Chloe, his professional smile turning strained. "Miss Harrington, that lady is a registered guest for this morning's departures. Everyone in this room has the proper clearance." Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh that caused the two other executives in the lounge to look up from their tablets. "Clearance? Don't be ridiculous, Robert. Look at her. She's probably a maid who snuck in here to steal the complimentary pastries or modern art. Look at that cheap bag. It's an absolute eyesore. I want her removed immediately. Her presence is making me incredibly uncomfortable, and if she isn't gone by the time my pilot arrives, I will ensure my father pulls our corporate account from this terminal by noon." Althea did not look up from her papers. She had heard every single word, but she chose to remain silent, her dignity intact. She turned a page of her medical journal, her hand perfectly steady. This absolute calm only infuriated Chloe further. The heiress marched directly toward Althea's corner, stopping just inches from her chair. She stood over the older woman, casting a shadow across the research papers. "Hey, I am talking about you," Chloe snapped, snapping her fingers directly in front of Althea's face. "Are you deaf as well as poorly dressed? Pack up your little papers and get out of this lounge before I have you thrown out. You don't belong here, and everyone in this room knows it." Althea slowly removed her reading glasses, folded them carefully, and placed them on the table. She looked up at Chloe with steady, unblinking eyes that showed no fear, only a deep, profound pity. "Young lady," Althea said, her voice quiet, measured, and completely devoid of anger, "this is a public accommodation for ticketed passengers. I suggest you return to your seat and mind your own business." Chloe's jaw tightened. Nobody spoke to a Harrington like that, especially not a black woman in jeans. The conflict was no longer about a lounge chair. It was an existential threat to Chloe's fragile ego, and she was determined to crush the woman sitting before her. What Chloe did not know was that the ground beneath her feet was already shifting. Would this arrogant heiress realize her mistake before it was too late? The tension in the private lounge grew so thick that the ambient hum of the air conditioning seemed to vanish entirely. Chloe stood frozen for a split second, shocked by Althea's calm defiance. But that shock quickly morphed into pure, unadulterated rage. Her face contorted into an ugly sneer. She needed a way to completely destroy this woman's dignity, to force her out of this high society sanctuary by any means necessary. It was at that exact moment that Chloe noticed her right wrist felt light. She glanced down. Her custom-made, platinum-plated diamond tennis bracelet featuring 24 flawless, round-cut diamonds totaling 12 carats was missing. The bracelet was valued at exactly $85,000, a gift from her father for her college graduation. In reality, Chloe had taken the bracelet off in the restroom 10 minutes earlier to apply a thick layer of designer hand cream and had left it sitting on the marble counter next to the sink. But her venomous mind saw an opportunity. She didn't care about the truth. She cared about winning. Chloe took a step back, pointing a manicured finger directly at Althea's chest. She stole it, Chloe screamed, her voice piercing the quiet luxury of the terminal. My diamond bracelet is gone. She sat right next to my table 5 minutes ago, and now my $85,000 jewelry is missing. Search her purse. She stole my bracelet. Althea didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, looking at the hysterical young woman with the same calm observation she used when analyzing a complex chemical reaction. I have not moved from this seat for the past 40 minutes, and I have certainly not touched your jewelry. Althea said, her voice remaining steady and quiet, contrasting sharply with Chloe's shrieks. You are a liar, Chloe shouted, her face turning an angry shade of crimson. People like you come into these places for one reason only, to take what belongs to hardworking, successful families like mine. Robert, call security right now. This black woman has my family heirloom in her cheap little bag, and I am not letting her leave this airport until I get it back. Robert Henderson, the assistant manager, came rushing over from the service desk, his hands trembling slightly. He knew the massive financial power of the Harrington family, and he knew that losing their business would end his career at Atlantic Aviation. He looked at Althea, his expression hardening, as he chose corporate loyalty over human decency. Ma'am, Robert said to Althea, his tone aggressive and accusatory. This is a very serious accusation. To resolve this quickly and avoid a scene, I must request that you open your bag and allow us to search your belongings immediately. Althea looked at Robert, a cold, sharp disappointment in her eyes. Mr. Henderson, you have absolutely no legal right to search my personal property based on the wild hysterics of an angry customer. I will not compromise my constitutional rights or my dignity to appease a spoiled child. How dare you! Chloe roared, stepping forward and lunging toward the table. With a violent jerk of her arm, she grabbed Althea's canvas tote bag by the straps and pulled it off the table. She flipped the bag upside down, dumping its entire contents onto the cold marble floor. Medical journals scattered across the floor. A gold fountain pen rolled under a nearby sofa. A leather wallet slid across the tiles. And then Chloe raised her designer heel and brought it down hard on a small silver-framed photograph that had slid out of the bag. The glass shattered with a sharp crunch. Underneath Chloe's shoe was a black and white picture of a smiling elderly woman, Althea's late mother, who had passed away 3 months ago after a long battle with cancer. It was the only photograph Althea carried with her. Oops! Chloe laughed maliciously, grinding her heel into the photograph, tearing the paper beneath the broken glass. Looks like your trash belonged in the garbage anyway. Now where is my bracelet? It must be hidden in the lining of this pathetic bag. The few other executives in the room watched in uncomfortable silence. Nobody moved. Nobody defended the quiet woman whose life was being tore apart on the floor. Althea stared at the shattered remains of her mother's photograph. For the first time, her jaw tightened and a dangerous, quiet fire ignited behind her dark eyes. She did not cry. She did not shout. She slowly stood up, drawing herself up to her full height, radiating an aura of absolute authority that made Robert take a step back. You have made a catastrophic mistake, young lady. Althea whispered, her voice low and vibrating with a power that shook the room. The only mistake here was letting you walk into this building, Chloe shot back, kicking the empty canvas bag away. Robert, what are you waiting for? Call the police. I want her handcuffed. I want her locked in a cell where she belongs. Robert quickly pulled out his radio, his voice shaking as he called for immediate armed airport police assistance in the VIP lounge. The trap was closing around Althea, but the hunters had no idea who they were actually cornering. Would the police listen to the truth, or would wealth dictate the law? Within less than 4 minutes, the heavy glass doors of the private terminal slid open, and two armed airport police officers entered the lounge. Their heavy combat boots thudded against the marble floor, completely shattering whatever illusion of peace remained in the VIP sanctuary. Leading the officers was Sequan Thomas Vance, a veteran cop with 20 years of service on his badge. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp and analytical as he scanned the chaotic scene in the corner of the lounge. Chloe immediately took center stage, her voice dropping into a well-rehearsed tone of victimhood mixed with immense arrogance. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she cried, gesturing wildly toward Althea. "I am Chloe Harrington. My family owns the Harrington Corporate Towers in Manhattan. This woman just stole my $85,000 platinum diamond bracelet right off my table." When I confronted her, she refused to cooperate, and she's been threatening me ever since. I want her arrested immediately for grand larceny. Officer Thomas Vance looked at Chloe, recognizing the powerful family name instantly. He then turned his gaze to Althea, who stood completely still among her scattered belongings, her face an unreadable mask of absolute composure. "Ma'am," Officer Vance said, stepping toward Althea, his hand resting casually near his utility belt. "What is your side of the story here? Did you take this lady's property?" "I did not," Althea replied, her voice steady, clear, and perfectly articulate. "I am a passenger waiting for my flight. This young woman approached me, began hurling racial slurs, dragged my bag off the table, and intentionally destroyed the only photograph I possess of my deceased mother. I have remained in this spot the entire time. If anyone should be arrested, it is her for harassment, vandalism, and filing a false police report." Before Officer Vance could process her words, Chloe stepped directly into his line of sight, her phone already pressed to her ear. "Listen to me, officer," Chloe said, her voice dripping with venom. "I am currently on the phone with my father's personal attorney, Arthur Sterling, senior partner at Sterling and Associates. If you do not put this thief in handcuffs right now, my father will call the police commissioner before you even finish your shift. We pay millions in taxes to keep criminals like her off our streets, not to have them protected by the police." Robert Henderson stepped forward, eager to add fuel to the fire. "Officer Vance, as the assistant manager of this facility, I can confirm that Miss Harrington's bracelet is missing, and this woman completely refused to comply with our security protocols when we asked to verify her items. She has been extremely disruptive and aggressive since she arrived." Officer Vance felt the immense weight of political and financial pressure crushing down on him. He looked at the scattered papers on the floor, then at the shattered silver frame under Chloe's shoe. He knew that defying a Harrington meant an immediate reassignment to the most miserable desk job in the precinct. He sighed, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "Ma'am," Vance said to Althea, his voice tight with discomfort, "given the value of the missing property and the statement from the facility manager, I am going to have to detain you for questioning. Please put your hands behind your back." Chloe's face lit up with a triumphant, malicious smile. She leaned forward, whispering close enough for Althea to hear, "I told you, you thieving piece of trash. People like you don't get to sit in our lounges. You're going to jail, and I'm going to make sure your name is completely ruined." Althea looked down at the steel handcuffs, then up at Officer Vance. She did not resist. She did not yell. Her voice remained incredibly calm, like the eye of a hurricane. "Officer Vance," Althea said softly, "before you execute this unlawful arrest under the pressure of this girl's family name, I suggest you ask the manager one simple question. Ask him to check the lounge's high-definition security cameras. The truth is recorded right above our heads." Chloe instantly panicked at the mention of the cameras, knowing very well she had left the bracelet in the restroom. She whirled on Robert Henderson, her eyes flashing with a silent command. Robert, catching her look, immediately cleared his throat and stepped between the officer and the desk. "Officer Vance, I am terribly sorry, but our main server underwent a scheduled maintenance protocol at exactly 6 a.m. this morning. The cameras in this specific zone are completely offline. There is absolutely no video footage available for the last hour. The room fell dead silent. The lie was transparent, but it was absolute. The manager had completely eliminated Althea's only immediate line of defense to protect the billionaire heiress. Chloe smirked her victory, seemingly total. "See?" Chloe mocked. "No cameras, no witnesses for you. Just a thief caught red-handed. Officer, put the cuffs on her now." Althea looked at Robert, then at Chloe, and a slow, chilling smile appeared on her lips. It was the smile of a grandmaster who had just watched their opponent walk directly into a checkmate. "Very well," Althea said, extending her wrists toward the officer. "Let us proceed to the interrogation room. I want every single word of this interaction documented on the official record. Because very soon, the price of this lie will become more than either of you can ever afford to pay." The small windowless interrogation room located just behind the security desk of the Atlantic Aviation Terminal felt entirely separate from the luxury outside. The walls were painted a sterile industrial beige, illuminated by the harsh, unyielding buzz of fluorescent overhead lights. In the center of the room sat a cold metal table bolted to the floor, flanked by 3 utilitarian plastic chairs. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and cleaning chemicals, a stark, deliberate contrast to the orchid-infused fragrance of the VIP lounge. Althea Vance sat calmly in one of the plastic chairs, her wrists bound tightly behind her back by the heavy steel handcuffs Officer Thomas Vance had applied. Despite the physical restraint and the intense humiliation of being marched down the corridor in front of onlookers, Althea sat with her spine perfectly straight. Her head was held high, radiating a quiet, unshakable dignity that seemed to fill the cramped room, making the small space feel like an apex boardroom rather than a detention cell. Chloe Harrington walked into the room right behind Officer Vance, her expensive crimson blazer draped casually over her shoulders like a cape. She didn't have the legal authority to be in an interrogation room, but her family's immense financial influence acted as an invisible key opening every restricted door in the airport. Robert Henderson, the assistant manager, hovered nervously by the doorway, his eyes darting between Chloe and the handcuffed woman, looking like a man who knew he had crossed a moral line but was too deeply invested in the lie to turn back. Chloe approached the metal table, leaning forward until her face was just inches away from Althea's. "Look at you," Chloe hissed, her voice dripping with pure, malicious satisfaction. "Just look at where you ended up. Sitting in handcuffs in a back room exactly where people of your color belong when they try to step out of their lane. Did you honestly think you could just walk into a multi-million-dollar terminal, look at someone like me, and think you were our equal? You are a thief, a nobody. That expensive gray sweater you're wearing, you probably stole that too, or bought it with a fraudulent credit card." Althea did not flinch, nor did she look away. She stared directly into Chloe's frantic, angry eyes, with a calm, analytical expression. "Your arrogance is quite fascinating, young lady," Althea said, her voice smooth and devoid of any fear. "You have built an entire identity out of paper money you did nothing to earn, and yet you carry yourself with the delusion that you are superior to the human beings around you. I pity you." "Pity me?" Chloe shrieked, her voice bouncing harshly off the metal walls. She whirled around to face Officer Vance, who was standing by the door, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Officer, why is this criminal still talking? Why haven't you ripped that expensive Hermes bag of hers open and found my platinum diamond bracelet? Yet I have a private Gulfstream jet fueled and waiting on the tarmac, and I am not missing my charity gala in Aspen because a crooked cop refuses to do his job." Officer Vance cleared his throat, adjusting his utility belt nervously. The political pressure from the Harrington family attorney, who had already called the precinct captain, was a heavy weight on his shoulders. He stepped up to the table where Althea's canvas bag and personal belongings had been placed in a plastic evidence bin. "Ma'am," Vance said, his voice tight, "we are going to conduct a full inventory search of your personal property now under the suspicion of felony grand larceny. If you have the bracelet hidden on your person, I suggest you hand it over now to make this easier on yourself." "I have already given you my answer, officer," Althea replied calmly. "You will find nothing but my personal research and official documents in that bag. Go ahead, search it." Chloe stepped forward, pushing past the officer. "Get out of the way, let me do it," she demanded, reaching into the plastic bin herself. She grabbed Althea's leather wallet and flung it onto the table, sending credit cards sliding across the cold metal. She ripped open the side pockets of the canvas bag, pulling out medical journals, high-end fountain pens, and a velvet pouch. "Where is it? Where did you hide it?" Chloe muttered frantically, her manicured fingers tearing at the fabric of the bag, desperate to prove her ugly assumption true. Robert Henderson watched from the door, his heart pounding. He knew the security cameras weren't actually undergoing maintenance. He had ordered them turned off manually. If the bracelet wasn't in the bag, his entire life would dissolve into a catastrophic lawsuit. "Check the inner lining, Miss Harrington," Robert suggested, his voice trembling slightly. "Professional thieves always sew hidden pockets into their bags to transport stolen luxury goods past airport security." Chloe ripped the bag completely apart, tearing the inner seams with a savage desperation. She dumped everything onto the table, but the 12-carat platinum diamond tennis bracelet was nowhere to be found. Instead, her hands wrapped around a heavy, solid gold key with a beautifully engraved crest, a sleek, dark blue diplomatic passport, and the official leather folder bearing the corporate stamp of global aviation authorities. Chloe dropped the items onto the table, her breath turning ragged as her eyes darted across the unexpected objects. "What is this trash?" Chloe snapped, trying to maintain her honesty. "She probably stole these diplomatic credentials too. Officer, search her pockets. She's hiding my $85,000 bracelet under her clothes." But Officer Vance wasn't looking at Chloe anymore. He was staring at the gold key and the official leather folder on the table, and the color was rapidly draining from his face. Would the officer finally realize that the woman he had handcuffed was not a thief, but someone far beyond his legal reach? The air in the interrogation room grew completely freezing as Officer Thomas Vance picked up the dark blue passport and the gold key from the metal table. His hands, usually steady from 20 years of law enforcement, began to tremble imperceptibly. He flipped open the diplomatic passport. The official gold seal inside belonged to the United States Department of State, designating the holder as a high-level international medical envoy with absolute legal immunity. The name, printed in crisp official typography, was Dr. Althea Vance, Chief Executive Officer and majority shareholder of Vanguard Bioaviation Group. Officer Vance's breath hitched in his throat. He slowly looked up from the passport to look at Althea, who was still sitting calmly in the metal chair, her wrists bound behind her back. He then opened the leather folder that Chloe had carelessly tossed onto the table. Inside were certified registration documents for a brand new customized Gulfstream G700 private aircraft, valued at exactly $45 million. The tail number listed on the deed of ownership was AGS-77. Chloe Harrington, completely oblivious to the legal storm gathering in the room, was still pacing frantically around the table. "Well, what are you waiting for, Vance?" Chloe demanded, crossing her arms hong huck. "Put her against the wall and strip search her. My father's attorney is tracking this entire investigation, and if my diamond bracelet isn't back on my wrist in 3 minutes, I will personally guarantee your badge is stripped by tomorrow morning." "Miss Harrington, shut up," Officer Vance whispered, his voice cracking with a sudden overwhelming terror. Chloe froze, her jaw dropping in sheer disbelief. "What did you just say to me? Do you have any idea who my father is? How dare you speak to a Harrington like—" I said shut up! Officer Vance roared, turning around with a face that had gone completely pale, sweat breaking out along his forehead. He ignored Chloe entirely and rushed over to Althea's chair. With fumbling, panicked movements, he pulled the heavy iron key from his utility belt and inserted it into the handcuffs. The steel locks clicked open, and the heavy restraints fell away from Althea's wrists with a loud metallic clatter on the floor. Althea slowly brought her hands forward, rubbing her wrists gently where the metal had pressed into her deep brown skin. She didn't yell, she didn't show panic. She simply adjusted her gray cashmere sweater and looked at the terrified officer with absolute calm superiority. "Dr. Vance!" Officer Vance stammered, his voice shaking violently as he dropped to one knee to gather her scattered medical papers from the floor, treating them like ancient sacred texts. "I am so terribly, deeply sorry. I was misled by the assistant manager and Miss Harrington. I did not realize your official status or who you were. Please, I beg you to understand I was just following standard protocol under high-value property theft report." Robert Henderson, standing near the doorway, felt his knees buckle. His eyes locked onto the registration documents for the $45 million Gulfstream jet. Atlantic Aviation handled hundreds of private flights, and he knew exactly who owned Vanguard Bio-Aviation Group. They didn't just charter planes. They owned the entire private fleet that Atlantic Aviation managed at JFK Terminal. Dr. Althea Vance was the primary billionaire investor who funded the very building they were currently standing in. "Robert," Chloe stammered, her arrogant facade finally showing a tiny crack as she saw the sheer panic consuming the airport manager and the police officer. "What is going on? Why did you let her out of the handcuffs? She's a thief. She has my $85,000 bracelet." Before Robert could offer a single word of explanation, the heavy metal door of the interrogation room was thrown open with immense force, banging loudly against the beige wall. A tall man dressed in a pristine white pilot uniform, with 4 gold stripes on his sleeves, marched into the room. It was Captain Marcus Brody, the veteran chief pilot for Vanguard Bio-Aviation. His face was filled with absolute fury as his eyes locked onto Althea. "Dr. Vance!" Captain Brody exclaimed, stepping past the police officer and bowing his head with immense respect. "We have been searching the entire terminal for you. The aircraft is fueled, the flight coordinates for the Global Medical Summit in Geneva are cleared, and the crew is ready for your command. Why are you in this security room? What has happened here?" Althea Vance slowly stood up from her chair, drawing herself up to her full, imposing height. She picked up the gold key from the table, the mechanical ignition key designed specifically for her custom-made private jet's auxiliary power system, a unique feature she had ordered for her aircraft. She slipped the gold key into her pocket and looked directly at Chloe Harrington, whose arrogant expression had completely vanished, replaced by an unsettling, icy dread creeping down her spine. "Captain Brody," Althea said, her voice echoing through the silent room with cold finality. "It appears that this young heiress has accused me of stealing her jewelry, and the assistant manager here thought it wise to turn off the security cameras to help her frame a black woman for grand larceny." The room became suffocatingly quiet. Nobody dared to breathe. The full magnitude of the situation was crashing down upon Chloe Harrington like a collapsing skyscraper. The woman she had just forced onto her knees, the woman she had called thieving black trash, was the absolute owner of the private jet terminal, the aircraft, and the very ground she stood on. What would happen when the truth was laid bare before everyone? The silence in the cramped interrogation room was suddenly broken by the rapid, panicked clicking of high heels coming down the hallway. A young female lounge attendant, out of breath and her face flushed with anxiety, burst through the open doorway. In her trembling hands, she held a shimmering object that caught the harsh fluorescent lights of the room, casting brilliant white reflections across the beige walls. "Miss Harrington!" The attendant gasped, struggling to catch her breath, as everyone in the room turned to look at her. "I found it. I found your platinum diamond tennis bracelet." It was wedged deep behind the cushions of the red velvet sofa in the private restroom. "You must have dropped it when you were applying your hand cream before. It was never stolen." The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Chloe Harrington froze, her entire body turning rigid as she stared at the $85,000 piece of jewelry in the attendant's hand. Her face went completely pale, all the color draining from her cheeks within a single second. The final piece of her desperate lie had been obliterated. There was no thief. There was no grand larceny. There was only her own ugly prejudice exposed for everyone in the terminal to see. Officer Thomas Vance stood up slowly from the floor, his face dark with immense anger as he glared at Chloe and Robert Henderson. He realized that his career had almost been completely destroyed because he listened to the toxic, racist hysterics of a spoiled billionaire heiress. He stepped toward the lounge attendant, took the diamond bracelet from her hands, and tossed it carelessly onto the metal table like a piece of cheap garbage. "Well, Miss Harrington," Officer Vance said, his voice dropping into a cold, dangerous register, "it seems your $85,000 family heirloom was right where your own carelessness left it. You just filed a false police report, forced an innocent United States diplomat into handcuffs, and pressured me to violate federal civil rights laws under the threat of my job." Chloe couldn't breathe. Her chest heaved as she looked at Althea Vance, who stood before her like an unmovable mountain of absolute power and dignity. The dynamic in the room had completely flipped. Chloe was no longer the powerful billionaire heiress controlling the room. She was a criminal caught in her own trap. I... Chloe stammered, her voice shaking violently as she took a step backward, her confident demeanor completely shattered. "It was just an honest mistake. Anyone could have misplaced their jewelry. I was stressed about my flight to Aspen, and this woman was sitting right next to my belongings, looking completely out of place. I didn't mean anything by it. An honest mistake." Dr. Althea Vance spoke, her voice quiet, but carrying a terrifying weight that made Robert Henderson look down at the floor in shame. "You did not make a mistake, Miss Harrington. You saw a black woman sitting quietly in a luxury space, and your immediate instinct was to label her a criminal. You didn't care about your bracelet. You cared about exercising your white privilege to humiliate someone you deemed beneath you. You deliberately stepped on the photograph of my deceased mother and called her trash. That was not a mistake. That was malice." Chloe's hands began to tremble so hard she had to grip the edge of the metal table to keep her balance. She looked toward Robert Henderson, her eyes begging for help, but the assistant manager was staring at his shoes, his face flushed red with the realization that his career at Atlantic Aviation was completely over. "Captain Brody," Dr. Vance said, turning her back to Chloe with absolute indifference, "please contact the terminal's corporate office immediately. Inform the board of directors that as the majority shareholder of Vanguard Bioaviation and the primary leaseholder of this airport facility, I am exercising my emergency operational rights under Section 14 of our corporate charter." Captain Brody smiled sharply, his eyes flashing with vindication. "What are your orders, Dr. Vance?" "First," Althea said, pointing a finger toward the trembling assistant manager, "Mr. Robert Henderson is terminated from his position at Atlantic Aviation, effective immediately. His security credentials are revoked, and I want a full corporate investigation into his decision to manually disable the security cameras this morning to assist a customer in a criminal frame-up." Robert fell back against the wall, his mouth opening and closing without a single sound coming out. He had thrown away a 15-year career in an instant, all to please a billionaire family that would never even remember his name. Second, Althea continued, her gaze shifting back to Chloe Harrington, who was now weeping silently, large tears ruining her expensive makeup. The charter contract for Gulfstream Flight AGS-77 to Aspen is canceled immediately. Miss Harrington will not be boarding my aircraft today or ever again. I want her name placed on our global permanent no-fly list across all Vanguard subsidiaries. She can walk to Colorado. Chloe's heart stopped. Missing the charity gala meant an absolute public relations nightmare for her family's real estate firm. But as she looked at the federal police officer stepping toward her with a pair of handcuffs, she realized that a missed flight was the very least of her worries. The billionaire heiress was about to face the one thing her family's money could never buy her way out of absolute legal accountability. The golden warm light of the afternoon sun did nothing to ease the freezing temperature inside the grand executive boardroom on the 54th floor of the Harrington Tower in Midtown Manhattan. For decades, this room had been the supreme command center where the Harrington family dictated terms to the city. Its massive mahogany table, flanked by 12 high-backed leather chairs, sat underneath a sprawling crystal chandelier. But today, the air inside was thick with an unyielding, suffocating panic. Chloe Harrington sat near the head of the table, her hands trembling violently as she held a porcelain cup of chamomile tea, her eyes red and swollen from hours of frantic weeping. She had shed her proud crimson blazer, now wrapped in a plain black jacket that made her look remarkably small. Across from her stood her father, Charles Harrington, a ruthless, silver-haired real estate tycoon whose name usually made governors and mayors fall into line. Today, however, his expensive tailored suit could not hide the deep, tight lines of terror carved into his forehead. He slammed his fist down on the polished wood table, causing the crystal glasses to shatter and vibrate. "Do you have any idea what you have done, Chloe?" Charles roared, his voice bouncing harshly off the soundproof glass walls. "You didn't just insult a random passenger, you targeted Dr. Althea Vance. She owns Vanguard Bioaviation. She holds the lease to the very terminal our corporate fleet uses. More than that, her biotechnology firm holds 32 federal medical patents that our primary investment banks are heavily leveraged against. By noon today, our corporate stock dropped exactly 9.4% in after-hours trading. That is over $240 million of our family's net worth wiped out because of your toxic Hong-Huk behavior." "Father, please," Chloe sobbed, her voice cracking as she buried her face in her hands. "I told you, it was a complete misunderstanding. I thought she stole my platinum bracelet. The lounge was supposed to be exclusive, and she was dressed so simply. I didn't think someone like her could possibly own a $45 million private jet. Robert told me the cameras were offline, so I thought, you thought you could frame a black woman because you believed your wealth made you untouchable." A sharp, freezing voice interrupted from the far end of the room. It was Victoria Sterling, the chief legal counsel for the Harrington Corporation. She stood near a massive digital monitor that was constantly refreshing with new data. Her face was pale, and her hands shook slightly as she tapped the glass screen. "Charles, it is much worse than just the stock market drop. The video recorded by an executive in the lounge before Robert turned off the cameras has leaked online. It has already gained over 15 million views on social media. The public is calling for a global boycott of every single residential building and luxury hotel we own. Search her purse is currently the #1 trending topic in the country." Right at that exact second, the massive double doors of the boardroom were thrown open with incredible force. The heavy oak doors hit the adjacent walls with a loud metallic bang that made everyone in the room jump from their leather seats. Dr. Althea Vance stepped into the Harrington boardroom, calmly wearing the exact same charcoal gray cashmere sweater and simple denim jeans she had worn in the interrogation room. Behind her came her legal team led by Elena Marcus, a legendary sharp-eyed federal civil rights attorney carrying a heavy leather briefcase. Alongside them was C. Quan Thomas Vance holding a sealed official manila folder containing the formal criminal complaint. Althea didn't look like a billionaire. She looked like an executioner of absolute truth. Charles Harrington immediately tried to piece together his honesty, stepping forward with a forced diplomatic smile that completely failed to hide his desperation. "Dr. Vance," Charles said, his voice straining to remain controlled, "thank you for coming to negotiate. Look, my daughter made a terrible emotional mistake. She is young, she was stressed about her flight to Aspen. We are prepared to offer you an immediate confidential settlement of $5 million, along with a public apology drafted by our best public relations team, if you agree to drop the criminal charges and sign a non-disclosure agreement." Althea Vance walked slowly to the opposite end of the table, ignoring Charles's extended hand completely. She pulled out a leather chair, sat down with absolute grace, and placed her hands flat on the mahogany surface. Her deep brown skin stood out beautifully against the light wood, a striking visual reminder of the woman they had tried to crush just hours before. "Mr. Harrington," Althea said, her voice quiet, steady, and dropping the room into an immediate dead silence. "You honestly believe that my dignity and the memory of my deceased mother, whose photograph your daughter deliberately crushed under her shoe, can be bought with $5 million of your stained real estate money? You are just as delusional as she is." Elena Marcus stepped forward, snapping her leather briefcase open with a sharp doot-quat sound. She slid a thick stack of legal documents across the table until they rested right in front of Chloe's trembling hands. "Let me make our position entirely clear to the Harrington Corporation," Elena said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "We are not here to negotiate a settlement. We have already filed a formal federal civil rights lawsuit under Title II of the Civil Rights Act for racial discrimination in a place of public accommodation. More than that, Officer Vance here has finalized the criminal charges against Chloe Harrington for filing a false police report, grand larceny, defamation, and criminal vandalism." Chloe let out a sharp gasp, her face turning an ashen shade of white as she looked at the documents. "You can't do this. It was my bracelet, I found it. Nobody was hurt. You were going to let me go to a federal prison cell to protect your pride, young lady." Althea whispered, her dark eyes flashing with a dangerous, quiet intensity that made Chloe freeze in her seat, unable to breathe. "You and your family have used your money to silence victims and bury the truth for generations. But today you ran into a woman who cannot be bought. Your money is completely useless here." Charles Harrington watched his daughter collapse into a corner, his hands trembling as he realized his empire was facing an unmovable mountain. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a glittering sea of diamonds, tuxedos, and silk dresses. It was 7 p.m. on the following evening, the night of the Harrington Group's annual shareholder gala. Over 500 of Wall Street's most powerful investors, international bankers, and financial reporters filled the massive space, standing underneath towering gold arches and crystal chandeliers that cast a warm, affluent glow over the crowd. This gala was supposed to celebrate the launch of a new $3 billion luxury development in Manhattan. Instead, it had become a survival battle for the Harrington name. Charles Harrington stood behind the elevated stage's gold podium, adjusting his microphone with cold, stiff fingers. His face was caked in stage makeup to hide the extreme exhaustion and worry underneath. Chloe sat hidden in the wings of the stage, her eyes wide with terror as she watched the sea of cameras positioned around the room. The financial reporters weren't talking about real estate. They were whispering about the viral airport video. "Ladies and gentlemen, shareholders," Charles began, his voice amplified through the high-end sound system, desperate to sound confident. "The Harrington Group has faced rumors before. The recent incident involving my daughter at JFK Terminal was entirely exaggerated by online media. It was an unfortunate minor seating misunderstanding that has already been resolved privately. Our company remains stronger than ever, and our quarterly projections are. Suddenly, the massive double doors at the very back of the grand ballroom slammed open with a deafening, thunderous sound that echoed across the marble floor. The entire crowd of 500 elites turned around instantly, their conversations dying out within a single second as a collective gasp filled the air. Dr. Althea Vance walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, surrounded by a team of federal marshals and her lead counsel, Elena Marcus. Behind them walked Eleanor Russo, a former top project manager for the Harrington Group, who had been fired 2 years ago after reporting Chloe's discriminatory hiring practices, her career completely destroyed by the family's lawyers. Next to her was Clara Higgins, the head flight attendant from the terminal, and Marcus Vale, a brilliant cybersecurity attorney, carrying a sleek black laptop connected directly to the venue's massive projection network. "Charles Harrington, you are lying to your shareholders." Althea's voice rang through the microphone she carried, perfectly clear, loud, and vibrating with absolute conviction. "Security, remove these people immediately," Charles shouted into his podium mic, his face turning an angry crimson as he pointed frantically toward the back of the room. "This is a private corporate event. You have absolutely no right to be here." But the security guards didn't move. Officer Thomas Vance stood at the main entrance holding an official federal subpoena that stripped the Harrington security team of their authority for the evening. The crowd erupted into furious murmurs as Marcus Vale plugged his laptop into the main terminal. Within less than 3 seconds, the giant 70-foot digital screens lining the ballroom walls flashed white, then filled with high-definition video footage. It wasn't the edited video from social media. It was the absolute raw security footage from the JFK5 IP lounge. The screen showed Chloe Harrington violently tearing Althea's bag off the table, deliberately stomping on the silver photograph of Althea's late mother, and screaming racial slurs. The room fell completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody dared to breathe as the horrific footage played before 500 of the most influential people in New York. The sheer cruelty and hong-huk behavior of the Harrington heiress was laid bare in high-definition glory. But the real shockwave hit a moment later. Marcus Vale pressed another key, and a loud audio recording began blasting through the ballroom's premium speakers. It was a recorded phone conversation between Charles Harrington and Robert Henderson, captured by an automated security backup system that the manager had forgotten to wipe. "Robert, I don't care what the security footage shows," Charles's recorded voice boomed through the ballroom, cold and calculating. "Delete the files manually. Wipe the server. If that black woman tries to sue us, my legal team will paint her as an unstable, vindictive thief. The Harrington name cannot be tarnished by a servant." The ballroom erupted into pure chaos. Major institutional investors stood up from their front-row tables, their faces twisted in absolute disgust. Financial reporters began snapping pictures frantically, the blinding white camera flashes popping like miniature lightning strikes across the stage. Charles Harrington froze behind the podium, his hands trembling so violently he dropped his speech papers onto the floor. Elena Marcus walked up the stage steps, holding an official document bearing the gold seal of the United States federal courts. "Charles Harrington, under the authority of the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, your corporate assets have been frozen pending a full investigation into civil rights obstruction, financial fraud, and witness tampering. And as for your daughter," 2 federal marshals stepped into the wings of the stage, their steel handcuffs gleaming under the stage lights. They approached Chloe Harrington, who was paralyzed with fear, weeping loudly as the cold metal bracelets clicked tightly around her wrists. The proud billionaire heiress was led down the stage steps in front of 500 flashing cameras, her entire world dissolving into a public nightmare she could never buy her way out of. 2 weeks after the historic confrontation at the Plaza Hotel, the executive floor of the Harrington Group looked entirely transformed. The heavy, dark mahogany doors that had hidden decades of corporate corruption and Hong Huk behavior were completely gone. In their place, massive walls of clear, transparent glass had been installed throughout the building, allowing every single employee to see exactly how decisions were being made. The old name on the building had been removed. The skyscraper was now officially renamed the Vance Global Biotech Tower. Dr. Althea Vance stood at the head of the grand conference table, looking out at a packed room of employees, board members, and international journalists. She wore her simple gray cashmere sweater, her demeanor as calm and humble as it had been on the day she was forced onto her knees. The digital screens behind her no longer showed luxury real estate projections. They displayed organizational charts for a massive new corporate structure centered entirely on worker equity and civil rights protection. Effective at 8 a.m. this morning, Althea announced into the microphones, her voice carrying a deep, quiet authority that commanded absolute respect from everyone in the room. The Harrington family has been completely stripped of their majority ownership through a mandatory federal board restructuring. Chloe Harrington has pled guilty to felony charges of filing a false police report, malicious destruction of property, and civil rights violations. She has been sentenced to exactly 2 years at a federal correctional facility with absolutely no possibility of early parole. Her family's money could not buy her a single day of freedom. A sudden spontaneous wave of thunderous applause broke out from the back of the room, where the administrative and cleaning staff were standing. For the first time in 30 years, they felt safe inside their own workplace. Furthermore, Althea continued, her expression softening as she looked toward the middle of the crowd. We are establishing the Mary Vance Memorial Foundation, funded entirely by a $50 million liquidation of Chloe Harrington's personal trust fund. This foundation will provide full university scholarships, medical housing, and legal protection for brilliant students of color who are pursuing careers in medicine and aviation. Famjia Kongui, Hombaujo Futuk Vaudia V, He Moya, Vahe Tongne, Sedambao Diuda. Althea turned her gaze toward a woman sitting in the front row, dressed in a sharp professional navy suit. It was Eleanor Russo, the project manager who had been broken and blacklisted by the Harrington family 2 years prior. "Eleanor Russo," Althea called out gently. "Please stand." Eleanor stood up slowly, her eyes filling with tears, as the 500 people in the room turned to look at her. "Ms. Russo is being reinstated to her executive position with full back pay, comprehensive benefits, and a permanent seat on our corporate board of directors. She will officially lead our new employee advocacy and civil rights division, ensuring that no worker in this building will ever have their voice silenced by an Hong Huk superior again." The applause this time was deafening, shaking the very glass walls of the boardroom. Eleanor wiped a tear from her cheek, a brilliant, confident smile finally returning to a face that had known only struggle for 2 long years. "And finally," Althea said, gesturing toward Clara Higgins, the flight attendant, who had been thrown away by the old management. "Clara Higgins is officially appointed as our Global Director of Luxury Service and Corporate Ethics. Her job will be to ensure that every passenger who passes through our terminals, whether they are flying in a bespoke business suit or a pair of worn denim jeans, is treated with the exact same level of profound, undeniable human respect." The press conference ended, and the room buzzed with an electric, beautiful energy of long-awaited justice. Althea spent the rest of the afternoon signing the official legal documents that cemented these changes, her gold fountain pen moving smoothly across the paper. Each signature was a promise kept to the people who had suffered in silence for far too long. The next morning, the sun rose brilliantly over JFK International Airport. Dr. Althea Vance walked down the corridor of the Atlantic Aviation Terminal, carrying her simple canvas bag, which had been perfectly repaired by a master craftsman. She wore her comfortable denim jeans and leather loafers, her appearance completely unchanged by the massive corporate empire she now controlled. As she approached the gate for her flight to a medical mission in Africa, a young gate agent in a crisp uniform recognized her face from the global news headlines. The agent immediately went pale, his hands trembling slightly as he stood up from his desk. "Dr. Vance," the young man stammered nervously, gesturing toward the premium boarding lane. "Please let me upgrade you to our ultra VIP private suite immediately. After everything you went through in this terminal, you deserve special luxury treatment. Let me handle your bag for you, ma'am." Althea Vance stopped, looked at the nervous young agent, and let out a warm, beautiful laugh that filled the quiet terminal with genuine harmony. She gently adjusted her canvas bag on her shoulder and shook her head. "Thank you, young man, but there is absolutely no need for that," Althea said, her voice filled with a quiet, regular dignity that touched everyone within earshot. "Keep the suite for someone who needs to feel important. This time we travel like human beings, equal, simple, and free." This story reminds us that true wealth is never found in a platinum bracelet, a luxury blazer, or the ownership deed of a private jet. True wealth lives within our character, our integrity, and how we treat those who have less power than us. Prejudices may cloud the world for a moment, but justice will always burn through the darkest lies. If you believe that human dignity should never be judged by the color of someone's skin or the simplicity of their clothes, please leave a comment with your thoughts below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel right now so you never miss our next powerful lesson in human decency. Have a beautiful day.